Attention, everybody. The views and opinions expressed on the show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and or their affiliate and supported ministries and or nonprofits. It's that time again, folks. Going to be talking about a bunch of cool stuff today and talking to a cool guy. Crime Time with Steve Albrecht. Take it away.
Thanks, Producer Matt. Thanks, Producer Jay. Welcome to Crime Time. This is Crime Time Podcast Episode 61. I'm Dr. Steve Albrecht, joining you from the Axe Media Group studios in Springfield, Missouri. For this hour, I'll be talking with Carl Hershman, a good friend of mine who retired after 32 years with the San Diego Police Department. Carl is a noted detective, a noted trainer, and a nationally recognized speaker. He's trained thousands of law enforcement professionals, prosecutors, military personnel, sexual assault nurses, examiners, and advocates for victims. He served as an instructor at the San Diego Regional Law Enforcement Academy on sex crimes investigations, interviewing and interrogation and investigations 101. He's worked in several assignments as an investigator for the PD in San Diego, Special Investigations Unit, Homicide, Sex Crimes, Elder Abuse, and the Catch Team, which is a cyber unit. Detective Hershman is on the training faculty for the Institute of Criminal Investigations, a government training agency, and is a member of the End Violence Against Women International Cadre of Experts. And we'll talk about EVAWA in our conversation. He's also a lifetime member of the California Sexual Assault Investigators Association, as testified, and he does a lot of expert witness work as an expert in sex crimes investigation, false reporting, which we'll talk about, and victimology of a sex crimes survivor. He also presents at San Diego area high schools, colleges, and universities on the subject of acquaintance rape and sexual assault by intoxication. Detective Hershman operates a consulting business in San Diego, advising and training law enforcement agencies across the country in sexual assault investigations. In 2007, Detective Hershman implemented, that's a hard word to say at this hour, the Sex Crimes Cold Case Unit in San Diego. During his 10 years in the Sex Crime Unit, he investigated more than 1,300 sexual assault cases. So we'll talk to my friend Carl about everything we need to know to keep our families, our loved ones, the women in our lives safe from sexual assault. So thanks for listening to Crime Time, where we talk about crime and crooks and cops and personal security. We talk about some dangerous people and lots of heroes. We even mentioned a few stupid crooks, and most importantly, I'll talk to you about what you can do to keep yourself and your family safe from crime and violence. As always, you need to be vigilant at home, in your neighborhood, in your community, at school, at work, and even on the road. This show exists to make you feel more empowered, more secure, and more educated on security issues and the criminal justice system. As background, I worked for the San Diego Police Department for 15 years, first as a patrol officer, then a reserve sergeant, and a domestic violence investigator. I now work as a training consultant and teach training workshops focusing on HR, employee coaching, workplace violence, and security in the workplace. I've written 24 books on business, workplace violence prevention, police subjects, and guns. You can find all of my books on Amazon Kindle. You can always reach me at my website, crimetimeradio.com. Send me an email. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Steve Albrecht. You can find past episodes of the show on SoundCloud, and we always run this show live on YouTube and Facebook every Tuesday at this time. So good morning, Carl.
Good morning.
And when I look at your background, you know, I think of the cases that you have handled, and I know some people in my life that you know, and the cops that I have met around the country that work in sexual assault and sex crimes. Just the concern I have for the cases and the emotionality of these things, and I mean, did you ever get so weary of the type of work that you do, where you say, how can people do this to other human beings? And you know, it's like working in child abuse, where you say, you know, how could somebody do this to a child? And you say, how could somebody do this to a man or a woman in terms of a sexual assault? And it's a different vibe in working in sex crimes. It's, you know, they're living, as you know from your work, they're living homicide victims, really, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's why I stayed in the unit for so long. My plan was to go into the unit, be there maybe 3 years and move on. And what I saw, very disturbing cases that I did work, I felt that obviously my plan changed. I stayed there for 10 years. And I just thought, with my investigative skills and my passion, so you know, I would read these cases, I'd get them and investigate them, and then I would, you know, really connect with the victims, and that could be, the victims were from all walks of life, when I was in patrol, you think you see everything, and you worked patrol. And when I got to the sex crimes unit, I was just pretty shocked. And also, I was concerned about the investigations, into these cases and how hard they were. And sometimes, a lot of times detectives would come into the unit and just get so burnt out. And, you have this hard shell anyway after working patrol or even other units. Once you work a sexual assault unit for any amount of time, and especially over 1,300 cases, you get that hard shell gets even harder.
Yeah, I feel for cops in your position, just like in other units where you say, we want the balance with our law enforcement responders, especially in detectives, to not be so much that we don't care anymore, that we go, well, whatever happened to them, so what? It's not my family. And then the other end of the spectrum is we care too much. So there's a concept in law enforcement, which is, a psychological issue of countertransference, which is, I lose focus, I lose perspective, I care too much, and I become too involved in these people's lives and cases. And then the other side, which is a lot of cops go to, which is they stop caring. They go, well, whatever, I'm just going to do my time and go home. And so I think, your to your benefit is that you really had that balance of caring about these people and what happened to them, but not losing your perspective.
Yeah, sure, and that's an easy thing to do when somebody comes to you, no matter what age, and a horrific thing has happened to them, and they're, telling you their deepest, darkest secrets, and you're able to make that, that connection with them. There was times I wanted to leave, obviously. I mean, I would come home and, tell my wife, as you know, who's a prosecutor, so she would understand, but I'd come home and I'm just like, I'm done, and then I would go back in and I would just look at my, into the faces and into the eyes of my victims. And I thought, okay, I'm going to work this one last case,
Right.
And after I finish these other 10, I'm out of here. And then you would get new ones. And that balance, is there, and it's tough, but it's a swing, it's hard to stay, even keeled. You are going to bounce around, and depending on the cases that you do get.
When you look at sex crimes investigators from a male-female perspective, it must be more of a challenge to be a male investigator, male detective dealing with women for these issues. The privacy, the humiliation, the embarrassment. Like you said, it's their it's the worst day of their life. And as a male, you have a different perspective of how you see sexuality than women do, obviously. And so you've really got to know how to handle victims from a standpoint of compassion. And I've seen, you and I have seen male sex crimes detectives that treat everybody sort of like, kind of a robotic way. So the female investigators have a little bit more advantage there. So talk to me about what you tried to do to build that empathy and to build trust for that person who had experienced something that men and women don't typically talk about in polite society.
Yeah, so I was able to, I look at it this way. I mean, depending on the age of my victim, if she was a teenager or early 20s, I could pull off the father figure. And, if they were closer to age than me, I could pull off the big brother figure. Out of over, 1,300 cases, I only had one female victim that requested a female detective. And, you would think there would be more, but maybe it was just because of the way I would speak with them. Because it is a walking that tightrope of this person looking at you, knowing that there's a 98% chance that the suspect was a male,
right?
And I may look like that person. So I was really strong pro advocate. I worked really close with our advocates, and for any investigator listening to this podcast, I would employ you to go out and really reach out to your advocates, because they also have a tough job. But I always made sure that advocate was there. And once that advocate knew that the type of investigator I was, they would really talk to the victims and let them know who I am and how I work. So it wasn't too much of a problem for me, but there were a lot of, there's not a lot, but some male investigators that had a tough time with that.
Yeah, you look at a kind of an unsung hero from your work is the sexual assault nurses that do the sexual assault forensics exams. I mean, that has to be, you're talking about, having to take, sperm samples from, vaginal cavities, anal cavities, mouth. You're looking at having to do, a forensic medical exam on this victim. It's it's necessary, as you know, for the DNA piece of it, and we'll talk about CODIS and things like that in a bit. But just how that job, you have to have the right kind of personality as a nurse to be that kind of do that kind of forensic work.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they obviously they're seeing the victim, soon after, sometimes immediately after, but soon after their assault, at least within 5 days of that. And here they're dealing with, a patient, if you will. Their job is to collect evidence, and they have a hard shell too. Sometimes it's tough to keep a perspective on what you're doing. These, young survivors would come in and, they're very emotional. Now this person who wants to collect evidence, but also want to help, has to poke and prod. And, a lot of times, because I do speak and I do instruct and I do teach, I would often talk to my victims way after everything is done through the, judicial system, and just ask them, what did I do wrong? What did I do right? And how do they solve the process? And one of them was, the sexual assault nurse examiner, they were like, well, they were really nice. However, I had to go through this exam, and there's just really no way around it. And I got to say, these Shane nurses, and I know a lot of them, because the conferences I go to, and I used to work with them, they're really, really good at their job, and they are compassionate. And again, having that advocate present is just so important.
Yeah, I think what people don't realize too is the sexual assault nurse examiners have to do the forensic exam against the suspects you bring in. There's the examination of the suspect head to toe to get the evidence off of this guy to match, and that's a whole other challenge as well, dealing with the perpetrator. I guess, Carl, the biggest thing that I think people don't understand about the work that you have done is what you and I would call the CSI effect, which is every rape kit must be tested because every rape kit has enough DNA in it from the semen to be able to identify the guy 5 minutes after we test the kit, like we see on TV. So talk about sort of the challenges of the CSI effect, and also explain what CODIS is.
Yeah, sure. So the CSI effect, it's a lot of times it hurts cases because you just don't have forensics in every case. Most sexual assaults are done what we call a rape by intoxication, and where you have usually a young female or a female is rendered unconscious or in a blackout situation, and is sexually assaulted. They're not going to come forward till anywhere from 5 to 10 days later after the assault, and there's to report, and there's just not going to be any forensic. And you walk into a courtroom with a prosecutor, and they want to see forensics. Okay, they want to see the DNA. They want to be able to say, this person sexually assaulted this person, and this is how it did it, and here's the forensics of it.
And the juries want to see that as well.
Well, yeah, they obviously you go into into court with evidence, but a lot of sexual assaults don't have that forensic component to it, and it comes down to testimonial and who's going to believe which side, and it just doesn't happen like you said on television. After the first commercial, the police are involved. The second commercial break, you're chasing down some guy, and then the last commercial break you're in court. It just doesn't work that way. And then a lot of cases, sometimes they take years, especially if you identify someone and they flee. And this may not go to court until he's caught, and he's apprehended and brought back. It could be years down the road.
So
as far as
define CODIS for us.
Yeah, so CODIS is a DNA. It's a combined index. It's a national data bank. So you say you have a case, you have a person that's not identified, but you do have a DNA profile of that suspect. So how it works in California and most states do the same thing. They have a local data bank. So they'll check that first. So they'll put the DNA profile, upload it into that local data bank. Then if that's not, doesn't get a match, they'll go into the state data bank, and then they'll go into CODIS, which is the national data bank, to see if there's a match. When, I got into the sex crimes unit in 2000 or 1999 or around there. Those data banks weren't as full as they are now with profiles. We still had the majority of the prisoners were not even, we didn't have a profile. They had never been swabbed, and their profile was uploaded. Now that was, 20 years ago. So now the data banks are pretty rich. But as you know, how cops and crooks work, we have a tool that is great, and then they figure out, how to get around that. So they try their earnest not to leave their DNA profile.
So the issue that we have across the country that you have seen, and it's on the news, occasionally, is the untested rape kit discussion, which is somehow it seems, to police departments. You look at, Detroit or, New York City or places where there's a backlog, and in California, certain agencies, that somehow we're not being supportive of victims, that we don't care. But talk about the untested rape kit piece. From my perspective, it's a couple things. One, it's the rape kit itself may not have enough DNA to get a CODIS hit, and the other piece is it's expensive to test, hundreds and hundreds or thousands of these cases across the country, and so they have to come up with funding, and then there's just a backlog in the labs. That just the process of doing it is the third issue, right?
Yeah, there's several issues, and in the perfect world, we would test them all. I mean, as an investigator, you'd want that. First of all, not all rape kits have DNA. There's just not. And if it's a partial profile, those could be uploaded, but then you get this very low number of possible suspects. But getting back to the reasons why a lot of kits are not processed is because the suspect's already identified. You have somebody and who said, oh, yeah, I had consensual sex with this person. It wasn't a sexual assault. So, therefore, you don't have to process that kit. The other could be that she recanted, or there was some reason why the investigation was stopped. So there's another reason why they're not processed. You also have tempora or time. There's an older rape kit, and this is the unfortunate part of this. There's a rape kit from 15 years ago, and even if you was to process that and identified somebody now, that's not going to go forward. Maybe if they already been adjudicated, a person says, okay, I plead guilty. So there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, it's unfortunate that money has to play a part, and a lot of people that's not in the criminal justice system don't understand the money portion of this thing. Because if money was not a problem, we would have 1,000 investigators,
Right.
So, but you have, highly trained people working in the lab, but you have to pay those people. That stuff costs money, the materials and such. I feel that when I'm asked about this issue, I would like to see all rape kits, if they have DNA, is just take the swabs and process those. Not the sheets, not the clothes, not the underwear, or anything like that. That way, you cut down the money portion of it, the time portion of it, and at least have those vagina swabs or rectal swabs, whatever it may be. And if they do have a DNA profile, whether this is going to court or not, is to upload it. I would love it to go straight to CODIS, because I've had cases where I was shocked, where DNA has actually proven a person not to be guilty, and others I thought was pretty sure they were innocent, and they weren't. So, at least test the swabs.
We're talking to Carl Hershman, who retired after 32 years with the San Diego Police Department. Detective Hershman is a nationally recognized speaker and trainer in sexual assault investigations. So, Carl, let's sing our praises from RPD, and also in California. It's hard these days to find good things to talk about in California. What do you think we do well in San Diego PD for sex crimes investigations? What do we do well in California that other states, and you go around the country talking about this, what are they learning from us and our approach?
Well, I mean, I'm doing a webinar tomorrow, and we'll talk about that a little later. 85% of my caseload was drunk by intoxication. And the problem is with those cases is that a lot of investigators do not know how to investigate those. And if they do, it's not a detailed, accurate investigation. So when they do send it over, it doesn't get issued. I think in California, under that statute, which is the 261A3 and A4 statute of the Penal Code, stating that you can't have sex with somebody that is severely intoxicated. I know our unit, at least I have been out of that unit for a while, but when we were there, we took those cases very seriously. Not just because they were not looked at in other agencies. It was just that it was a crime that occurred. I mean, this is a person, whether you were severely intoxicated or not, was sexually assaulted. And we really concentrated on those cases. And that's kind of where I kind of got my teaching moment with other agencies, and we began to teach about it, was to vigorously investigate those and have a good working relationship with the DA's office. And I think in San Diego, that's what was really kind of, we stood out. And I knew every single one of our DAs that worked the sex crimes unit. We would sit down and I would hand carry my cases over, which I was taught a long time ago. Just don't send them over. So that team atmosphere is what I think California does a very good job at. Now, I mean, obviously there's some cases that, that's not done with, but for a large agency in a large city like San Diego, we had that sexual assault response team attitude where when I got a case in the morning, it wasn't just me. It was my advocate. It was the SART nurse. It was other detectives in the unit. It was the DA. And then, we worked very well with the social workers and the mental health providers. So I think it was the team atmosphere, which I don't think happens across. I speak across the nation, and I hear this, kind of headbutting with this agency or headbutting with this, with the nurses or whatever, and it's just, it's just not going to work well. But in California, I think we did a great job.
So I've been doing some webinars for Los Angeles City on mandated reporters. So mandated reporter for elder abuse, mandated reporter for developmental adult abuse, and for child abuse. And so, it sort of leads to a parallel that, you have seen in your work, which is many times when it comes to sexual assault, whether an adult or a child, there's sort of this mindset that it must be a stranger. So we teach, stranger danger to kids, and we have this sense of, being concerned about the creepy guy in the van that comes by and snatches the kid off the street. And when you look at sexual assaults, I mean, it's mostly from people that the victim knows. It's a relative, it's an ex-boyfriend or something like that. So talk about kind of the victim or the suspect sort of profile from the standpoint of the stranger rape, the guy on the street that grabs this person, it happens, but it's much more likely to be someone that has some sort of connection through school or work or an acquaintance or relative. Talk about that kind of connection with the suspects.
Yeah, I mean, look, 98% of the time, the victim's going to know who the suspect is. Or even if it's a brief encounter, at a bar or at a party, they're going to know who that person is. And the likelihood of a family or friends or somebody in the neighborhood, somebody at your church, somebody at work, that's the person who is going to, is going to be your suspect in the sexual assault. And your victim's going to be able to tell you that. Now, like you said, I mean, there was 2% of the time that we had several serial rapists working in San Diego. But yeah, you're going to know that person. Victims tend to feel comfortable, obviously, around their friends and their family. And, they don't think, they trust this other person. They don't think they're going to do anything bad to them. So, when it does happen, there's this whole dynamic that comes into play. The relationships are very important. Depending on that relationship, what type, is it a family, is it a friend, a coworker? Does the suspect have a leverage, a financial leverage, or over the victim? So, I think a lot of times investigators kind of overlook what that relationship is. A lot of times victims don't want to come forward because of those relationships. Maybe it was a boss. He's he owns the company, and you end up getting severely intoxicated at a Christmas party. And I've had these cases where my victim is sexually assaulted, in the back bedroom, and is she going to come forward in this small company and out her boss? She has to think, well, everybody else is not going to, like me or believe me. I'm going to lose my job. I have to have rent. There's all these other priorities that they have.
Right. There's shame and embarrassment and then,
right.
the sense that you've seen in your cases, which is the victim believes that she was at fault for what happened and how the suspect manipulates that kind of perspective, that you wanted this as a behavior.
Well, yeah, so then it's a consent issue. And most, all sex crimes have some kind of a consent, element to it. When a suspect, and I'll just say, the male being a suspect, because the majority are, it's a male-dominant crime. When they believe that they think they have consent, even though they don't, consent issues could be age, underage, mental capacity, or it could be, rape by intoxication, where somebody is severely intoxicated who cannot give consent. And this is another issue why these don't go to court. The term I hate is he said, she said cases. More than likely your suspect is not a criminal. More than likely, they're not some, hardcore biker, Hell's Angel or anything like that, or they have a criminal record. They usually have a good standing in the community, and you have your victim, it's that I didn't give consent. I wasn't able to. I was passed out or blacked out. And so there you had that issue where half the people are going to believe him, and then the other half are going to believe her. And unfortunately, sometimes my victims, their own family members didn't believe them, or their own friends didn't believe them. So it's a high hurdle that consent defense is a high hurdle to get over. And not a lot of, investigators know how to do that. I mean, I remember when I went into sex crimes unit, because I had been an investigator out at Mid-City, which, as you know, is the east end of San Diego, was a very busy unit or division. I never had to deal with consent. My very first case, obviously, in the sex crimes unit, I see this consent element. I'm like, what? She asked for it? I mean, she wanted it? It was very confusing. I worked with a really great sergeant who trained me and set me straight. But yeah, that's a defense.
When you look at the training you do, especially for colleges and universities, I mean, what tips do you give college-age girls typically? I mean, there's sorority parties and fraternity parties and bar hopping and all the stuff that goes with being in college. and alcohol in college. I mean, there's just a 150-year connection to the two. I mean, what are the tips that you try to say to this group that thinks they can manage their alcohol, thinks they can manage their behavior to keep them from getting in these situations in the first place?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I tell them, watch what you drink. I mean, watch how much you drink. In the perfect world, we could all go out, get plowed, fall face down, passed out with $100 bill sticking out of our pocket, and nobody would take it, But, the reality is you have a very young person just out of high school in a lot of cases. Just because you're a college student, I mean, 24 months ago, you were, a 12th grader.
Right.
In high school. So your experiences change. You may have, you were a 3-beer person in high school, and now you're drinking that, the jungle juice at some frat party, and God knows what is in it. And you want to keep up and, with your peers, and you want to party, and that, part of college is partying. And I didn't go to college, but I get it, but the reality is, when you drink, your perspectives change, even if you can keep your perspective, because a lot of times these young people are, they're binge drinking, and, they're at a party for 30 minutes and they've had 3 drinks, and, they're not, when you're older like us and you have a little bit more experience, you can pace yourself. A lot of times, my victims would tell me, I drank beer in high school, but now they're drinking Long Island iced teas, or they're drinking the jungle juice, or they're doing shots in college. So my tip to them is just, if you're going down a path that you haven't been down before, just be very careful. If you are going with a couple other females, one should be not drinking, one should be totally sober, and just kind of keeping an eye out. Set yourself a time to leave. The longer you're there, the more you drink, the more likely you're going to be severely intoxicated. A lot of times, people think that these date rape drugs are the problem, and and this does happen, but the majority of the time, it's just that it's had way too much alcohol. So I tell them to back off, slow down, and don't drink as much.
So that's sort of a, the Bill Cosby sort of story, and this idea that some, we've seen it with professional athletes and other people that got Rohypnol or some other date rape drug into their victims. But talk about that. One is it's pretty rare, as you've said. It's mostly alcohol. And the other is, do we have the lab testing capability to figure out that someone has had Rohypnol in their system? I mean, it's pretty brief drug, isn't it, in terms of recognizing it?
Yeah, sure. So I just, I speak here. I teach our post classes, which is the police officer standards and training for California. And I always call our lab, and I know a couple people down there, and I always ask them how many positive, cases did you had with GHB? And they've had, this was just 2 weeks ago, they've had 2 positive tests in the last 13 years.
Wow.
And and those 2, I'm sure, I don't know those cases, but I'm sure that the victim was found shortly after being, given the GHB. Yeah, you're right. The burn-off rate is so quick on these things that, in these type of drugs, the Rohypnol, ketamine, any of that stuff is very fast. Now, remember, in these types of cases, our victims are not coming forward until 5 to 10 days later.
Right.
So if they're not caught immediately after they were given the dosage, then you're not going to get a positive hit. So for investigators, what I teach is pay very close attention to what your victim is telling you. If they're telling you that I had a half a drink, I just got to the bar, or I had a soda, I wasn't even drinking, I was a designated driver, I wasn't getting drunk that night, and they're adamant, look, I had this half a drink, and when I did, within a few, 30 seconds or so, the room started spinning. I felt like I was nauseated. Those symptoms, that's GHB.
Right.
Now, you may not have a test to say it is, but you have the testimony or the statement of of your victim telling you what the symptoms, so you can narrow it down. You just, can't prove it, but you can narrow it down.
Let me jump over to another controversial issue here. In California, we have 290 of the Penal Code, which is that sex offenders, once they are designated by the court as a sex offender, have to register. And it's a lifetime commitment. They register 5 days before or after their birthday each year, and every time they change the county that they live in. When I was in the reserves for the PD, I did that work for Joanne, doing 290 interviews in the lobby at the PD. And it was very hard for me because my daughter had just been born, and it was difficult to talk to these guys. So my sense of 290 as a process, based on the Megan's Law in this country, is that two things. One, we can't use it for discriminatory practices like hiring, apartments, credit, giving somebody insurance, things like that. And my perspective is, why can't we use it as a guideline in hiring? But you've seen now, especially in California, we have ban the box and other things where so much of a person's criminal background is basically, not discussed in making the hiring decision. But the other part is, talk to me about how 290 is or is not a predictor of recidivism. Because you look at some of these college professors that have written all these studies that say, well, 290 registrants don't recidivate any more than anybody else, and it's a false narrative to say that we need a database of these people because they don't go out and reoffend. What's your sense of the recidivism rate of people that are on the 290 list?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that some research that I've read too, where some say half, some say 30%. I was under the impression before I got into the sex crimes unit that that all of them did, or 90%, or and if my experience is I've had cases where obviously sex restaurants had reoffended, but I can tell you that the ones that did were more than my violent suspects. They were not the person that was sexually assaulting a person that had been intoxicated. Now, I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, and I've had cases like that. I'm just saying that the majority of the 290 registered sex offenders that reoffended were more of a person that was either a serial type of person or a child molester. From what my experience and from what I can tell, that reoffenders tend to have much younger victims. That was air quotes that you couldn't see.
Right.
The child molesters that we all read about or see on television or in the movies or on Dateline or 48 Hours or anything like that are the typical that they need to be locked down. I think most registered sex offenders, they're obviously proven that they would be willing to, sexually abuse another person, and they definitely need to be tracked. But reoffend, in my opinion, that I would say less than 1/3. Now, that's just a number I throw out there, not doing research. But I think it's a very important aspect of sexual, some of these guys that are sexual deviants that do need to be tracked. I think all of them do, but again, like you said, it can't be used against them. But I think sometimes it is. Right.
I mean, I had a case once where a woman was in an apartment complex, and she got a creepy vibe off the maintenance guy, and she put him in the database, and he showed up, and she went to the apartment owners and said, I don't want this guy working here, and they fired him, and they got sued, and he got his job back and back pay and a bunch of other things because the court said it's not a predictor of future sexual violence or future sexual assault. But we have this sort of double standard, which is these guys are on this list. But yet again, we can't use it in a sort of discriminatory way. We get that. But, what's the purpose of having the list if we don't interpret the person's behavior and say, this is a guy we don't want to hire at our school or to be a bus driver or whatever it happens to be. So I think we're sort of stuck in a kind of a limbo with some of these guys who's, they're at one end of the spectrum, you have the serial or sexually violent predator. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have somebody who committed a sex crime, like statutory rape, which got on the, gets him on the 290 list in some counties. So I think we're sort of, as with a lot of things in government, we get sort of stuck in what the solution is, and there's no easy solutions with the 290 stuff. Tara, I wanted to talk to you about the expert witness work that you do, and also tell me about this webinar that you're doing.
Yeah, so I never, when you become a police officer, you just figure I'm going to go out and chase the bad guys and, save the world. The last thing you think is at the very, towards the end of your career that you're going to be an expert in anything. And people would just kind of contact me and say, hey, well, I want to bounce this off of you, or, hey, your name was given to me. And then, before you know it, you're an expert. And so now I work a lot with civil attorneys. In fact, after your podcast, I have a deposition to do. So the attorneys that I work for are all pro-victim, and they are, suing people personally, or they could be suing a company, or it all, whatever, it depends. So a lot of times they'll give me their cases, I'll read through them, and then I'll do a report, on the aspect of the case, either the quality of it, the accuracy of it. And then, I'll do a deposition. Now for police agencies, they'll contact me. I'll go in and testify, usually to delayed reporting, because that is a big issue. And as criminal defense attorneys, their job is to discredit the victim, and that's the first thing they do. As well, if you were really raped, you would have called immediately, but you waited a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever it may be. So I go in, I testify in front of a jury as an expert in victimology, and a lot of that component of delayed reporting is pretty prevalent there. That's, I would say, 9 out of 10 times that I testify would be because of delayed reporting.
So the cases you're working on from a civil perspective, the victim is suing the perpetrator typically, or the organization that allowed, from a security failure or something like that to happen, like a hotel or something like that?
Correct.
My experience in the deposition process, and I find it vigorously uncomfortable, is no matter what you've done in your career, it's not enough for the deposing attorney. So you could have written the top 10 books on sexual assault investigation would be enough for those guys. So the webinar that you're doing, how do people get a hold of you in terms of attorneys and such? Is LinkedIn the best place to get a hold of you?
No, the best place is in Violence Against Women International website. I am on LinkedIn. I don't use it very often, but on the Violence Against Women website, there's a profile of me there, my bio, and also my email.
So that's
address.
It's EVAWAINTL.org, something like that. Am I right?
Yeah, it's in Violence Against Women International.org.
Yeah, and so talk to you about your relationship with the founder there, Joanna Shamble, one of our sergeants in the sex crimes unit in PD, and one of my mentors for sure. So tell me about how she runs that organization and what they do.
Yeah, when she actually recruited me, because you always get recruited into a sex crimes unit, you never asked to go in. So she recruited me to go in there. I didn't know her, who she was, and so she was my sergeant for about 3 years, and I was just kind of blown away by her knowledge in this area. And she ended up retiring and started the organization. And she's, again, it's right in the name, it's international. When I speak at her conferences, they'll have about 2,500 attendees show up, and a good, about 1/3 of them are from out of the country. It's amazing, talking to investigators from South Africa, the UK, just all over the United States. And there's one thing that is constant: sex crimes that happen here are the same sex crimes that happen in their country. So she's built this organization up, and I'm proud to say that, I was trained by her, by the best. And she reaches out to a lot of people, and now she has several people on her staff, and very professional organization and a lot of information. If you go to the website, the Imbalance Against Women International website, they have free training on there where you could go to their on their website. You see the courses and you take the courses, and again, it's all free. You do it, off your the computer, and you'll get a little certificate at the end. And for any prosecutor, investigator, or even advocates, anybody that works within sex crimes, it's a big advantage to have that information.
Yeah,
I mean, she talks about report writing and everything. So
yeah, you and I spoke at the conference in Seattle and about 6 or 7 years ago, and I was just amazed. I'd been to the conference to speak at the one in San Diego, but just the number of people that come and from all around the world, and the rich resources of presentations and things that people have there for that subject. So certainly, that's the go-to place for sexual assault investigators, advocates, as you say. Carl, we have about 4 minutes or so left. Give me a sense of what we need to do as a society, and that's a complex issue, but keeping our women safe, and men get sexually assaulted, and certainly in boys and girls as well. But we're really talking about what we're doing to keep the women in our lives safe from sexual assault. Besides just the alcohol awareness, what things are really on your mind about this concern?
Yeah, I have a 13-year-old daughter. So, even before she was born, I saw this major problem, and it's a major issue across the nation. As you say, is keeping our females safe. I also had males that were victims, so we want to keep them safe also, obviously. When you get sent a jury, summons, and you show up and it's a rape case, and I'm not here to dissuade any jurors, but keep an open mind, because obviously in the court room, victims are put up on on the stand, and they try to discredit them, but just keep an open mind. Pay attention to what your kids are doing on the computer. And when I say kids, they could be in their 20s. It doesn't matter. Check their history and who they're talking to. And because now, suspects usually were local, and now they're from all over the world.
Right.
So just pay attention. If you feel that something isn't right, it probably isn't.
I've been talking with Carl Hershman. Go ahead, Carl.
I just wanted real quickly, the webinar tomorrow, it's free. If anybody wants to sign up for it, you can go through the Imbalance Against Women International website. And a lot of, training costs so much money. So you can get on there, sign up for it. You can do it today or early tomorrow morning. It's tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m. my time, which is California time, Pacific Standard Time. So sign up for it. It's free training. Wendy Patrick, DA, that I worked with and speak with, we're both actually tag teaming it tomorrow. Good
friend of mine and a great lady, Wendy Patrick. I've been talking with Carl Hershman, who retired after 32 years with the San Diego Police Department. Detective Hershman is a nationally recognized speaker in sexual assault investigations. Carl, always great to talk to you, and good luck going forward. Thanks very much for your time today, pal.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
Take care. In our world,
Bye-bye.
Thanks. In our world, there are sheep and shepherds and wolves. Too many people are sheep, and too few people are shepherds. There are a lot of wolves out there. There are not enough police officers or sheriff's deputies to protect us all, so you need to be a shepherd. Take care of yourself and protect your family, your loved ones, and your friends and coworkers. Pay attention. Be prepared to defend yourself with legal force if necessary. Be a good witness for the police. If you see a crime, stay safe and aware and alert at home, at work, at school, and even on the road. Thanks for listening to Crime Time. My thanks to Jim Wining, producer Matt, producer Jay, and all the good folks at Axe Media Group. I'm Steve Albrecht. Thanks for listening to What I Know Is Right.